You all ready to join me today in our trip to outer space?
Yeah.
Albert Shivers.
The Matrix doesn't have him.
That's very true.
Come along quietly or not.
They don't have to like it, but they're gonna see what happens.
Goodbye, wimps.
And now, without further ado,
from Albert Shivers.
The general concept is that creativity flourishes in an atmosphere of freedom.
Hello everybody. Before we get to my conversation with Esther, just want to let you guys know that the first 16 minutes of this conversation, the sound is a little weird, but it does fix itself. Thanks. Talk to you on the other side.
Mit Stagechecks, der Schäumeke Glänzer, schwenkt der Hub den Schmutz und Drain.
Alright folks, welcome to the Planet Shivers podcast. I am, and always will be, Albert Shivers. And today I'm excited to have on a fellow visual artist, but she has a lot of things to her credit. I want to welcome to the show Esther Star Angel Pagan. Thanks so much for doing the show.
Thank you for having me, Albert.
So you have a lot of things to your credit, but let's start with your visual art. So you're a mixed media artist. So if you could tell me a little bit of how you arrived to become an artist with your visual art.
Sure. Well, I've been dabbling in art since I was a child. My mother was a floral designer at Bleecker Street in the village. She used to design the pieces for the showroom. So she worked a lot with ribbon. My grandmother worked as a floor manager in a button factory. And that was my maternal grandmother. And my paternal grandmother was a knitter. When I was 5, my mother gave me fabric, ribbons, and buttons and said, "Here, make dresses for your Barbie dolls." And I've been sewing by hand, which is couture, since I was 5. I was a very introverted child, kind of like a loner. I was very imaginative, and my hands are my livelihood. So I started creating since I was young. And I love color. Color moves me. As I grew older, as a teenager, I was very into fashion. I used to go to the village and go to the antique shops and buy vintage clothing and dabble with sewing. When I went to college, I went to FIT and Parsons, and I studied fashion design and millinery. And then I became a massage therapist, a healer, working with my hands. So I found that I could use any type of medium to create, whether it was fabric, leather, buttons, ribbons, metal, plastics, wood, and it made me happy. And that's how I became a mixed media artist. Give me anything and I'll make a piece of art out of it,
So do you usually incorporate a lot of sewing and things like that into your visual artwork?
It depends on the piece. If it requires sewing, yes. I always add a little bit of, I'm really into buttons. Like I'm a button collector. So I use buttons a lot and ribbons and just symbols. I use a lot of symbolism as well. So I usually dream about what I'm going to create. And then I will go to a store, like a fabric store or Michael's or Blick, and then look at what I have at hand to play with, and then pick and choose what I want to, use as my mediums, and then create.
So you said you use a lot of symbolism. What's some examples of the symbolism you use?
Well, because I'm a breast cancer survivor, I opted to have a double mastectomy back in 2012 in October. Actually, this coming 18th will be 9 years of me being breast cancer free.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you. So I use a lot of breasts in my visual arts and mixed media with stitches on the breasts. I'm also a poet.
Okay.
So a lot of times if I have an art piece, I will have a poem to it. Or if I have a poem, I will have an art piece to it.
Okay.
So I was part of a couple of poetry groups, and I performed at the National Black Theater of Harlem, and the piece was called Stitches, Stitches, Where Are My Stitches? How does my garden grow? That inspired me to continue to use breast with stitches in my art.
Okay, gotcha. What's your process of pairing a piece of poetry with a piece of art?
It depends on the feeling of the poem or the piece of art. For instance, I was invited to an exhibit where it was about hair.
Okay.
So I made a piece, a cultural piece of a female with hair. I got synthetic hair and I made it into a braid. I got a nose ring. I bought neck rings and cowrie shells. I made braids coming out of her head and glued the shells onto the braids, put the nose ring, the neck rings, and then I wrote a poem called Pelo. Pelo is hair in Spanish. And the poem was about how there's all different types of hair, whether it's curly, straight, wavy, kinky, synthetic, or no hair. I even went into, baldness for cancer.
Right.
And then I went into Rapunzel and, Samson and Delilah for power. And at the end of the poem, I said that hair is universal. We're all one. So that is how I pair the art with the poetry. It depends on what I'm creating and what my feeling is about, that genre, if we might say.
Yeah.
And I always try to take a negative and make it a positive, and I always try to make everything flow.
Gotcha. So if we can just jump back for a second, your performance in Harlem, we can go into a little bit more detail on that because that sounds very interesting. So was it your visual art and a poetry performance that you did?
It was a poetry performance and not visual.
Okay.
But my garment was visual.
Okay.
I was barefoot and I wanted to wear something pink. I got a pink flower and I put it around my ankle. I had a black off-the-shoulder velvet dress on. And then after I finished I sewed stitches onto my breast with pink yarn.
Okay.
And at the end of the performance, I took the threads and pulled them out and then threw them away because that was part of the stanza. And then when I turned around, I had a pink ribbon sewn onto the lower back of my dress.
Okay.
So you could say that was part of the art.
Yeah, absolutely. And was it one poem you performed or was it several?
It was one poem.
Okay.
Would you like to hear it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And this poem, it was inspired by everything that I went through when I was diagnosed, when I went through the sadness of losing part of my womanhood. I had 11 surgeries in the span of 3 or 4 years. I had surgery every 6 months. And I'm on massage therapist. I couldn't work.
Right.
I couldn't push, pull, or lift 5 pounds. So I was kind of depressed.
Yeah.
And that's when I really dove into poetry and my art. And color kept me from really going into a deep depression because color moved me, and I saw that when I used color, it made me happy. I started writing and journaling, and the name of the journaling is called My Colors of Cancer.
Okay.
And every day I will wake up and feel, okay, am I feeling happy today?
Mm-hmm.
Am I feeling pretty in pink? You know, red with anger, gray because I'm a little shallow. And that's how I would write. I was writing very raw, and because I'm very schooled in the body and the anatomy and physiology, I use a lot of terminology, and I started to advocate and write poetry about all the procedures that I was having and about cancer per se.
Okay.
So here's the poem. This is called Stitches, Stitches. Where are my stitches? Stitches, where are you? Will my garden grow? I shimmy mambo mojito dances with Frida Esther. Laying with ostrich feathers, I sink into the heels and toes of my soul. Picking red daisies, does he love my body? My brain craving to be desired. Taking clothes off, I see my solitude. Sirens freed me from jumping in the puddle before I drowned. Pulling myself from the rear mirror of my mind, I saved myself with a tree branch used like a match. I couldn't pull the curtain open. My windows were blackened. Teardrops falling in the horizon, lifting me, yearning to smell grandma's hugs and kisses. Tomorrow comes opening doors. My doll toy eye sockets and breasts crisscrossed, then broken. I love her anyway. My scent, tapioca rice pudding, custard melting in my mouth, sinful dark cocoa crackling in my womb. My strength, like a machete, fighting, piercing, swinging, I come out of my cocoon. Butterfly wings not clipped, don't cry anymore. The cocoon shell dried, feeling soft fascia where skin slithered. Brick layers in sienna, fuchsia, and cobalt blue. No rainbows, but dust, memories. Hearing music, I lift myself with muscles not intact, rejuvenated by nature's Gatorade. I save my placenta for a day like today. My railroad track garden will spout, then grow. My stitches will fly away.
Very good. And that's what you read at the... Wow. So now, hearing that, mixed with how you told me that you performed it, I'm sure that was really powerful for the audience who was watching.
It was very powerful, and it was powerful for me to let those feelings go, because I was holding on to that for like 3 years.
Okay.
And what saved me was my art and my poetry.
Did one, between your art and your poetry, did you gravitate to one before the other? Or was it always something that was hand in hand for you?
It was always hand in hand. It was always a combination. It was always something that flowed spiritually and from my soul, from my heart. It was something that I knew that I had to paint on canvas or write on paper. It was just a message that I had to share with the world.
Yeah. I feel like in times like that, so I have like a third-party perspective in a way about some of what you went through. My mother went through cancer, and she ended up finding photography as an outlet. Now, it was something that she never really was interested in before. She was artistic, but never did much with it. She gets a camera one year for her birthday or something, and then next thing you know, she's running around doing awesome photography, and it became an outlet for her. So I can, although I don't totally first person realize, I seen that in her, and it helps me a little bit better to understand how your poetry and art were working for you. Did you do any of this more so on your visual art side? So you mentioned your stitching and things. How does the color work into your art?
The color palette, it seems, the way I create, is always the same palette, and it's colors that pop.
Okay.
Colors that really don't belong together, but I don't care. I believe that rules are made to be broken, you know? And going back to your mother's situation, when you go through adversity in your life and you don't want to throw the towel in because you're a fighter, you're a survivor, she found photography, invented.
Right.
That was a healing tool. That's a healing tool. When you're going through adversity, you want to fight with whatever that adversity is, and you want to heal yourself from pain, from trauma, from doubt. Like all these things, you know, come to you psychologically, and you look for things to help. Like, you know, help me, please. And I guess the art and poetry were my tools for my healing. And it was something that made me happy.
So it sounds like you always had it in your life, if I'm understanding you right. Did you get deeper into art? Or was it something you always were doing it, but it hit a little bit harder?
Well, I was always doing it because I am also a domestic abuse survivor and a childhood survivor of physical abuse. So I was always looking for an outlet to heal my spirit. And that's why I was always connected with art and poetry. It kind of became part of who I am. And as I learned how to understand that it was not about me, it was about them, and it was not my fault, and I learned how to forgive. And you never forget.
Right.
You never forget, because something that's ingrained in your DNA, in your physical being, in your spirit, in your soul, you're kind of broken. But you can put those pieces back together again with certain mediums, as I said, art and poetry. And it just made me the person I am. It gave me a lot of strength. Very creative. Truly an artist, and I share that with other people. You know, I know what I went through as a child, you know, as a young adult, with the domestic violence, and I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. So I share my experiences creatively to give strength to others.
And so that goes to you work with other domestic violence victims with your art?
Yes, I am part of a nonprofit organization. It's called Milagros Day Worldwide. And there's another part of the organization called Healing Voices. And what we did was we took a 12-week intensive accelerated course on how to use positive tools for healing trauma. And it's not just domestic violence. It could be trauma from cancer. It could be trauma from an accident, from anxiety, from mental illness. And I found that sharing my poetry in color was very helpful for these young ladies in healing their trauma. I like to research and know the history of art. Whenever you learn something, you always have to research the history of. And I follow certain masters, like, I love Picasso and Frida and Matisse. And there's a group in London. They're called the London Drawing Group, and I found them on Facebook. And they have different classes that they teach. And what they do is they pick a master and teach their technique.
Okay.
So I take these classes and I teach the techniques that I learn.
Nice. What is it about those three artists you mentioned, or other ones that you might want to mention, that inspires you?
The fact that they're abstract artists, and my life has always been so abstract that it resonates with me and I gravitate towards it. I feel like I am a Picasso from mi raza, which means I'm a female Picasso of my race, because a lot of the way that I create resonates with his abstract technique and color and his reasoning for however he was feeling.
Gotcha. And with Frida and Matisse, what do you draw from them?
Matisse, I love his arrangement of color and shape. And Frida, she had an accident in a trolley where this steel rod went into her pelvis and she broke her back. She had 32 surgeries to heal her back, and she started painting because she had to be on her back to heal.
Right.
And she would paint on her cast. So her parents bought her a mirror and put it on the ceiling so she could see herself, and she would paint herself. So she painted portraits of herself. But the thing that makes me resonate with her was the pain that she went through because of her adversity. Right. So that's why I gravitate towards her and her strength.
Right. Yeah. So you said something before that it was intriguing to me also. You said the words true artist, and as also a visual artist, that's something that I'm always thinking about, is what is it to be an artist? And I think it's not one definition. There's probably many definitions. So in your mind, as a visual artist, what do you consider to be a true artist, or what's your version of that?
I'll share my quote.
Okay.
And it took me a long time to figure this out, because you go through your life and you go through experiences and you're like, why me, and then you wallow a little bit, and then you're like, okay, I'm not gonna wallow anymore, I can't do this, and you talk to the universe, God, whoever you want to call this power, of positivity. And everyone has a purpose. Why are you here? And everyone has a story.
Right.
What are you going to do with that story? How are you going to, relay that story to your audience? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be sad? Is it going to be happy? Is it going to have meaning? What's your message? So it took me a long time to figure out that, I was raised Catholic, but I'm Buddhist.
Okay.
But I have a very close relationship with God because he saved me from breast cancer, from skin cancer, and from domestic violence. As a child, my father adored me. My mother was so jealous of that adoration. She would egg him to beat me.
Jeez.
And after the beatings, he would get on his knees to beg me for forgiveness, weeping, howling. And those were the mixed messages that I was reared with.
Yeah.
And I used to speak to the moon. The moon was my imaginary friend. And I wrote a poem about the moon. And I wrote the poem because I want to share it with the public school system so that children could recognize what abuse is, what neglect is. And as I shared it with a friend of mine, he said to me, you know, you were not talking to the moon, you were talking to God, because even in the darkness you found light. And I was like, oh wow, that's so true. When I was a massage therapist, I had a client who was a survivor, and as I was assessing her, we were talking about the heart, because she had a heart condition, and I was going through the same adversity with my heart. There was something wrong. I didn't know what it was. And I was diagnosed with a big heart, with an enlarged heart. And I like to laugh. Laughter is the best medicine for me. So when she said, oh, okay, well, what medication? Oh, what's your condition? I said, well, I have a big heart. And she's like, really? What medication are you on? And I said, I'm not on any medication. She's like, why? You're crazy. I said, because I have no insurance. She says, why? You're crazy. In that conversation, she gave me advice on how to get low-income insurance. And when I went to the doctor and went for a routine mammogram was when I found out I had breast cancer.
Okay.
So had I not had that conversation with this woman, I feel that had God not put her in my path, I would be walking around with breast cancer.
Right.
So my quote is, an art is my passion. It you know, seeps out of my pores. It's, you know, I could paint and not want to eat or drink water. I could paint and I won't stop until, you know, my piece is finished. So I'm like, okay, take your passion, marry it to your genius, and that's your purpose. So for me, that's what a true artist is. Taking all his passions, marrying it to his genius, and that's your purpose.
Yeah, I like that. That's very cool. And that, you know, that explains art, and as it comes from a much more deep place from each individual artist.
Exactly. Like I said, everyone has a story to tell. What are you going to do with it? I choose to share my stories so that I could vent, so that I could continue to heal myself, because you never stop healing. So if you help someone to heal, you're also healing yourself. If you help someone to be successful, you're also being successful. Like right now, you're helping me with this interview. This is your success, but you're giving me a piece of your success for me.
Right. After your diagnosis, did your art change?
My art did change. It got more powerful with the color, just with the overall piece. I got into using so many more different mediums, and I just feel that the universe is my canvas, and it's infinite. You know, it's just infinite.
Yeah. So what sort of those new changes to your art, were they something that helped to get you through that time, or do you still implement them?
Both. It helped me get through that time, and I still implement them because I still feel that way. I still feel that I'm a survivor, I'm a fighter. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Yeah.
And I always have a message. I have a message to share because that's who I am. You know, I don't know how to be otherwise.
Gotcha. So by this point, I've definitely learned your art is very and almost intensely personal.
Yes.
Now, I've had this happen to me on occasion, but I'm curious, do you ever, when you go back to look at pieces of art that may be a couple years old, do you ever notice anything in there that maybe you didn't notice even when you were doing it? Or does older art of yours hit you differently now?
What I notice about my art when I look at it, really, honestly, I'm like, oh my God, I made that. I did that. That's mine. I can't believe that I created that. And then it takes me back, and I gift of myself. And I have gifted of myself all my life to friends and family. And I notice that when I see these people again, they always, bring that up. Do you remember that hat that you gave me? Do you remember that piece that I bought from you? Do you remember that bow that you made for me? So that makes me feel really happy as an artist that people, remember your work.
So you also recently had a show here in Strasbourg at the Create and Be Art Gallery. At that show, it was your poetry and your artwork. So you perform poetry?
No, I didn't. I performed poetry at the event where I met you.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So what is it? What do you get from the performance of it? Most artists have their gallery show, and like speaking for myself at least, there's your art on the wall, and then you schmooze and talk about your art. But then also adding in an element of performance to it. So what do you get out of that, and what are you going for?
Well, I want the viewer to leave with a piece of me, with a piece of my persona, with a piece of, how I create, why I create, and where it comes from. So the performance is really important for me. That's why I started to combine the two in terms of art and poetry. For instance, if I was to show this, I would definitely like to perform stitches.
Right.
Because then people would know, wow, she's a breast cancer survivor. This is how she felt. She felt like she was a garden. She fought cancer. She's rejuvenated. Look how beautiful those colors are. I want to share that with other cancer, victims, family with the loved ones, so that they could have a choice. Okay, you don't have to wallow. You don't have to just let the disease kill you. Yeah. And by the way, I call cancer that monster that doesn't even have a face. Because he doesn't have a face. So I share these things with people so that they could have hope and courage and strength. So that's what I get from it when I exhibit my work and perform or talk about the piece with prose or just, advocate.
Yeah.
I advocate about mental illness. I advocate about child abuse, domestic abuse, cancer. I advocate about hidden disabilities. Due to all the physical abuse that I endured in my life, I have a hidden disability. And it's frustrating, it's embarrassing, it causes anguish, anger, anxiety, and I advocate because you don't have to be blind or have the loss of a limb to have a disability.
Right.
You could have a disability because you had an accident in your brain and your brain doesn't function just like everyone else's or like the norm. So that kind of makes you feel different. And I take it as, okay, I'm different, but I'm unique. And when you lose one sense, your other senses become stronger. So that's another reason why I attribute myself to being an artist, because I don't have the cognitive ability to learn. I have a cognitive learning disability, which means when I first learn something, it's like taking a 5-year-old by their hand and really dissecting what the person is ingesting. But after I learn, I become the professional, the expert, and I could teach you.
Right.
And I also have dyscalculia. It's dyslexia is when you transfer letters Dyscalculia is when you transfer numbers. Life is a number.
Yeah.
So if I was to bump into math on the street, I would give him a beat down. But because of that, and I really wanted to study medicine, I wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
But I could never be a doctor because I could never get my formulas straight. So I became a massage therapist. It's okay, I'm on the sidelines.
Right.
But I didn't give up.
No,
Okay?
that's true.
So I advocate and share that with people so that if they're in the same, going through the same experience, they know that they could vent and they have a choice to do other things and, feel strongly about what they do.
Understood. Does your massage therapy overlap into your art at all?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
When I went to school, I lived in New York. I just came to live in Pennsylvania 3 years ago.
Okay.
I went to the Swedish Institute, which is considered like the Harvard of massage schools. They teach medical courses that doctors take.
Okay.
That's what we had to learn. And because of my disability, it was really difficult for me. Hands-on, I was acing everything. But when it came to taking exams, I was not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I found out about my disability. So after I graduated, it took me a year longer to graduate, but I didn't give up. And it took me 2 tries for the state board exam, but at the second try, I, was successful. I challenged myself every year, and I learned a different technique. I wanted to challenge myself because when you can't do something, you want to do it even more. You strive for that. It's something that you don't have, so you really want it more. So I challenged myself to learn a different modality every year, and every year I, invested in my education and learned different techniques. And when I was in college, I took a fencing class, and the fencing made me a better massage therapist. And I dance around the table.
Okay.
And I use different technique to help the client with their pain. So if you go for a massage and you say, I want deep tissue, and you have an hour massage, you cannot have deep tissue on all your body.
Right.
You may have deep tissue around the shoulders, the lower back, but you need different technique for your face, for your feet, for your legs, for your arms. So I let my hands do the walking and feel what that person needs. And then I, incorporate the technique for that person. So I call it combination massage.
Okay.
And I recently became yoga certified. So I do yoga massage, which means when a person is in a position, I will adjust them with the massage.
Okay. How did you like the move? Was it like to come from New York to Strasbourg?
Well, I lived in New York for most of my life.
Uh-huh.
I was born in Ohio, but I was raised in the Bronx.
Okay.
And my parents owned a home in the North Bronx. And my parents became elderly. My siblings were living in Florida, and I was the only one here to care for my parents. So I lived with them until my father passed, and then my mother decided to relocate to Florida to live, with my sister. So when that happened, I had no place to go, and my boyfriend lives in Salt Creek in Bushkill. And that's why I'm here.
Okay.
He opened his doors to me, which I'm very grateful for. And the transition was wonderful.
Nice.
Because New York is changing. It's not the way it used to be. It's saturated with people and cars and crime. And as an artist, you don't want to be around that static. You don't want to be around that noise. So I love it here. Like, it just has freed me of turmoil from New York. You know, like the noise. You can't really work. You can't really, you know, perform the way you want to.
Right.
I wake up in the morning and I start my art, whatever I'm creating, and I multitask. I could be creating 2 or 3 things at one time.
Right.
Then I have breakfast, I'll clean the house a bit, I'll go back to my work, I'll do poetry, you know, and then I get ready for dinner, and then my boyfriend comes home, and, you know, we chill and relax, and then the next day I wake up and do art again. And I look for places to exhibit, and to teach, and just to do what I love to do best.
What pieces are you working on now?
So I'm gonna have an exhibit in the Gay Center in Allentown, and it's gonna be focused on breast cancer. And I had an exhibit in Hostos Community College in the Bronx 2 years after my diagnosis, and it was a one-woman show, and it was called My Colors of Cancer. And what I did was I took the calendar year and I made eccentric hat for each month, and I photographed it with nude models. So the exhibit was the photograph with the hat next to it. And so that is what I'm going to exhibit in this gallery. And the gallery has 2 floors, and they're giving me both galleries. So on the top floor is going to be the hat exhibit, and on the bottom floor is going to be my abstract work. And this is going to be one of the pieces that's going to be exhibited.
Okay, great.
And this also.
Cool. What is the date on that?
The date is November 18th. Till the end of January. I believe January 21st.
Okay, great.
And I'll let you know the details. And I also I became a member of the Pocono Arts Council, because I found that as a member you could exhibit your art. So I've had 3 exhibits with that group, and right now one of my pieces is in the Pocono Art Cultural Center, the theater. They have a butterfly exhibit, and one of my pieces is there. So I call it Free Butterfly. No, I'm sorry, Peaceful Butterfly. So the butterfly in the wings is a peace sign.
Nice.
So it's a peaceful butterfly. Yeah. And you should, I don't know if you're a member or not of the Arts Council.
No, I'm not.
You should become a member, because you'll be able to exhibit your pieces.
Yeah.
And they have a gallery in the Pocono Art Center where I think the exhibit changes every three months. And, you know, they sell your work. So you need to, you know, expose yourself.
And where, if people want to look up your work, where could they find your work?
On Facebook, I'm Star Angel. On Instagram, StarAngel7. I also have a website called Artisan, the number 4, aquas.com. And I list a lot of my work there and sell my work there. And I have to apologize because I've been so far behind with the upkeep of my website. I don't have everything on the website, but I have to, you know, that's something that I have to prioritize, because I, you know, really want people to see what I do. And one more thing.
Sure, yeah.
So I lived with a friend of mine for 6 months because she had foot surgery. And in the process, I was helping her eliminate, you know, her things, because she was moving to the Carolinas, and she was throwing away 2 lamps, 2 beautiful lamps. I'm like, no, don't throw them away. I'll take them. I'll paint something on the lampshades. So I started painting lampshades, and that's a big hit now, the lampshades. So I got someone to purchase my first lampshade, and it was for her daughter because she was going through domestic violence with her boyfriend. So I made a beautiful piece for her, and it's a stand-up lamp.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh my God, this is to shed light and awareness to stop domestic violence. So whenever I do a lamp, depending on what the client wants, if they follow a certain genre, it's to shed light and awareness on that subject.
Cool. Well, we're just about ready to wrap up. I really want to thank you for doing this. It was a lot of fun to talk to you and get to know you as an artist and as a person a little bit better.
Thank you so much for having me, and likewise, that's how I feel too, you know. It's nice to know that there's people in your circle that you could, like, you know, just hang out with and do art with, and just, it's great.
Yeah, great. Well, hopefully we'll have a part 2 soon.
Great. I would love that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the Planet Shivers podcast. It was so great having Esther on, hearing her story, getting to know her, and I hope we have other conversations in the future. Don't forget, you could find this podcast episode and all the other ones on all major podcast platforms and YouTube with video. There's going to be another podcast coming right up for you, and in the meantime, take care of yourself and take care of somebody else.